The next stop was Skogafoss, one of the tallest waterfalls in the country, with a sheer drop of 200 feet. Today we're here in southern Iceland at Skogafoss waterfall. This is probably one of the most popular to visit waterfalls in all of Iceland. As you can probably see, there are people coming back and forth. We're in the winter, so it's the off season. In the summertime, there can be literally a few hundred people here, so we're really, really lucky. So this is a very iconic waterfall. It's also a very tall waterfall. So what I did is we parked pretty far back from where we're standing now, and I sort of worked my way up in phases. So I tried to stand a little bit further away, zoomed in, and eventually worked myself up to this position. The reason I started from the back and moved forward is that way I didn't leave any footsteps. If I would have walked all the way up to the waterfall and started walking back, turning my camera around, I may have left footsteps in the snow. Since we were some of the first people to get here, we really had a minimal amount of imprints in the snow already. So we had this nice clean palette to work with. I didn't want to ruin that. Another thing that I noticed shooting this waterfall is I wanted to experiment along this riverbank. So instead of just having the whitescape, if I would have moved a little bit into the snow and just shot the waterfall from the snow, I would have just ended up with a white foreground and white sides on the background, and it really wouldn't have given that much compositional interest. So what I've tried to do is I've positioned myself right in the center of this, and I'm standing in the water just far enough to where it doesn't overlap my boots and soak my socks. So just enough for where I'm protected by my waterproof boots, and just enough where I can get some of these little ice flow patterns. So throughout shooting here, I've tried a couple different compositions. I've tried both horizontal and vertical compositions, and I've actually settled on a vertical composition being my favorite here. And the reason is, with a vertical composition, I can tilt the frame down a little bit more, and I can use these nice ice patchy flows plus these rocks to create really nice leading lines and foreground compositional elements moving into the tall waterfall. Now take a look at the wide shot compared to the tall shot. I really like the tall shot because it seems to lead the eye into the waterfall a little bit more. With the wide shot, however, I think that there's too much on the left and the right. It's hard to just frame the waterfall and make it the center of interest. So we've shot a lot of waterfalls in Iceland on this visit, and this might be the first time that we've had the light directly on the waterfall. So it gives us a really nice opportunity to get something completely different here, especially considering that we have this winter wonderland landscape in front of us. Now, since the light is changing, I really want to focus on the times when the light is illuminating the waterfall. So what I like to do is set up my shot, compose everything, make sure it's all in focus, and then I'm using the shower cap again to protect the front of the lens. Reason being is we're getting periods of mixed snow, and the wind changes constantly here in Iceland, and anytime that it's pushing this direction, it only takes a few seconds for this cap to be off the lens to where it's just covered with water and I can't get the shot. During the filming of this segment, one of the lenses got a ton of water on the front of it, so you can actually see the difference between a clean lens and a wet one. So I've been here for a little while. Before the sun came out, I didn't have any light on the foreground, but I had a really nice mixed cloudy sky. Now that the light's out, the sky's almost completely clear. So what I want to try to do is take one of these vertical frames with the light on the waterfall and combine it with one of the frames where I had the sky. So this is going to be the first time that we're going to do a sky replacement. Now, earlier in the session, I actually had the perfect sky. I think it's going to fit into that blue space perfectly. Another thing that I've done shooting here, same thing that I've done with the other waterfalls, anytime when there's just an extraordinary amount of spray or conditions where there's water hitting the front of the lens, I really don't like to use filters unless I absolutely have to, because it's more contact surface for the water to accumulate. So just like we've done in previous examples, I'm going to push the extents of the camera limits to try to drag the shutter as much as possible at f/22. In this case, I'm going to set the auto exposure bracketing to 5 brackets. I'm going to put the ISO as low as possible, and I'm going to do one version at f8, and I'm going to do one version at f/22. The reason I'm doing one at f8 is f8 is sort of the sweet spot in the lens where everything's going to be sharp, perfect, no vignetting, no diffraction, and it also won't show too many imprints on the lens. If I'm shooting around f5.6 or f8, f8 and there's a lot of water drops on the lens, I really won't be able to see them. They'll be a little bit softer. But if I'm shooting at f22, I'm gonna see all those things, all the little specks that are on my lens. I'm gonna see any specks that are on my sensor, and there's gonna be a lot of cleanup. So also what I wanna do in post, we're gonna combine the different sky in the frame, then we're also going to use the base f8 to do most of our blending. Then we're gonna take the additional exposure at f22 that has the soft water, and just like the other example, we're gonna blend it in. So it's a little bit more complicated than the last shot, but it's very similar. So I know that some of you are gonna say, wait a minute, I hate replacing skies. I feel like that's not photography anymore. Now we're just talking like Photoshop work, and it's something completely different. Well, my view is if you have something that's extraordinary, but it just needs that little bit extra, then it's definitely worth the trouble. In this case, I love the foreground, I love the light, the snow is beautiful, and I've already shot some frames that had a nice mixed cloudy sky. So for me, it's not that much of a push to just take one of the frames that I've already shot, blend that sky in, to make something that I'm really, really proud of that I consider a portfolio piece. People ask me all the time where I draw the line. I feel like it's really up to you. You can push it as far as you want. You can be as traditional as you want. That's not my call to make, where the line should and should not be crossed. I just know that I like my work to have a certain feeling in it. And if I don't feel that the sky gives that feeling that I'm trying to convey, then I'll do everything that I can to capture one. If the sky behind the waterfall in a previous shot wasn't working, for example, I might be able to shoot a scene of just the sky to my left or the right. Something that has similar lighting. I obviously couldn't shoot into the sun because it's over there, but if I shot something that was similar, I'd have no problem compositing it in, as long as it looked convincing. I never want my work to look unconvincing or look like it has seams in it. As long as it's seamless, the sky looks like it fits. If it's in the same location that I shot it, it's even better. I feel like I just want to convey the right feeling in my work. Just a little bit to talk about the focal length and focusing that I'm doing here. This is the 16-35 lens again. I'm focused rather wide so that I can use some of these rocky elements in the foreground, as I said. But what I'm doing is I'm focusing on the background. Now, some people might like to use a focus stacking technique here, which means that you take one set of brackets focused on the foreground and one focused on the background. In this case, since these rocks are pretty far away from the camera, I've decided to only focus on the background. The reason being is the lens gets so wet in between shots that I want to minimize the amount of shots that I take. So in this shot, I think it works perfectly just focusing on the background and shooting at f8 and f22. Later on in the tutorial, we're going to get into more complex focus stacking when we need to focus on different areas of the image. So I have everything set up. I have the cap over my lens, and I've been waiting for the light to get just like this. So right now I'm gonna go ahead and shoot a few more shots because I have this nice rainbow occurring back there. I'm not sure if it's gonna make it into the shot because it's faint, but I'm gonna try to get it. This light is really beautiful right now. If we take a look at what I shot when we first got here when it was snowing, you can see that it's still a beautiful scene, but it feels kind of flat. This light streaming down from behind me and illuminating the waterfall tends to chisel out the little details and give a little bit more life to the scene. So it's something that's worth waiting for. If you're in one of these scenes and you see that light is going to start to change, the sun is going to come out, spend the time when the sun is behind the clouds to compose your shot. So in these brief little windows when you have sunlight, you can take advantage of it and you don't have to set up while the light is good. So just to tie everything together that we've done here, it's a very wet, dynamic situation here. We have a lot of snow, have a lot of mist. So I've kept the shower cap over my camera, made sure that my lens is completely dry and clean so that when the light gets really good, I've been able to capture the moment that I want. I'm shooting 5 exposure brackets, one set at f8, one set at f22, so we can use the slower shutter at f22 to blend the softer water in. I'm also going to be taking an earlier shot where I had a better sky, and we're going to use that sky in the background here to break up some of the monotonous blue. So we're going to have to work on this a little bit in Photoshop to get it to be a final really nice image. And another thing we're probably going to have to do is blend out the people that you see standing behind me. So we're basically going to use some techniques to paint them out and make it look like we're all alone here. Welcome to Lesson 7, Post-Processing for Skogafoss Waterfall. If you guys remember, we shot in the snow. I picked a vertical composition and I was waiting for the light to get really good. We had some people in the frame that we needed to get rid of, so we're gonna have to clean that up. Not only that, we've been dealing with dust spot and water spot removal from the sensor this whole time, so I decided to shoot 2 different exposures. I shot one at, it looks like f8, so that I get a clean version that's not gonna have all that sensor dust and all those issues, and I shot another one at f22 to smooth out the water. So we're gonna take the one at f8 as a base, blend in that smooth water, and we're gonna paint out all the people. But that's not all. We're gonna take it one step further this time. While I was shooting in the beginning, before the light came out, we had really nice clouds in the sky, and then once the light came out, the sky was totally blue. So we're gonna take one of the shots from earlier in the day, that's actually even a horizontal shot, and we're gonna bring the sky into the blue sky to add more texture and detail. So this is the first time that we're gonna do a sky replacement together. Let's take a look at our Lightroom file. So here I only have 3 files. You guys see that I have one shot at f8 and I have one shot at f22. Now I wasn't using any filters on the front of the camera because it was a really wet environment. The water spray was changing and I just really wanted to softly focus and soften this waterfall. Camera stayed in the same position, nothing really changed, but if we look at this one in comparison, we have more texture in the waterfall. We also have more texture in the water. So this f22 exposure is going to give us softer water here, softer reflection, and a softer waterfall. We also get a little bit of this rainbow, which is a kind of a nice element, but it's not that crucial. In fact, I don't think I'm going to be able to enhance it and make it look like the rainbow that this area is famous for. So after we blend these 2 together, we're going to take this 3rd exposure, which was shot quite a bit of time earlier at f8. It's not even a vertical composition, but you can see we have some sky texture. So that's going to be step 3. So let's go ahead and get started. The first thing that I do is a little bit of exposure balancing. Now again, this area up here is not blown out, but I don't like how sharp those highlights are. They're getting a little bit too close to white. So I'm going to bring the highlights down just a little bit. And again, this is standard practice just to change it just a little bit. I also want to pull the shadows just a little bit so those ice flows in the foreground look really nice. Now since I've done a few things here to the highlights and the shadows, I'm going to make sure that I sync these settings. So I'm going to go ahead and select this one. Actually, yeah, I'm going to do something a little bit different. I'm just going to copy them because I'm not sure what I had selected before. In this case, I'm going to make sure that I don't have to do the white balance. I didn't do white balance. I'm just going to have basic tone, contrast, shadows, and highlights. I'm going to say copy, and I'm just going to paste it here. So we're going to say develop settings and paste settings. Now it's time to bring these into Photoshop. So the first one I want to bring in is the base exposure. So I'm going to say export with previous. It's going to remember my settings from earlier. Everything's going to be the same. And this is going to load into Photoshop. Next step, going back to Lightroom, selecting the next one, right-clicking, again, export with previous. With this file, I'm going to select all, copy it, close it, and then paste it in. It's really easy, so now I get the soft water and the soft reflection. I'm going to create a mask, a black one, by alt-clicking the mask button. And I'm actually just going to select my paintbrush with the B key. I'm going to set the flow to be 0. I'm going to hit 0 on the keyboard. It's going to make it 100%. And I'm just going to paint the soft portion of the waterfall back in. And that's all I really want to do here is just the soft waterfall. Now, if you look at these people down here, it doesn't matter if I paint over them because they're there anyway. I shot this pretty much back to back. You can see probably if I paint her in, she's just going to change position. She's taking an iPhone picture. But it actually seems like if I paint a little bit of these people in, I actually remove one of them as well. So it might be easier to clone out. Really, this is just, these people are so far, it's going to be easy to remove them. Let's go ahead and focus on this foreground here. We're going to focus right here on this highlight and right here on the water to soften it out. Let's get all that nice soft waterfall. So that looks pretty good. Now remember before when I was shooting at f22, all of those times you saw how much I had to clean up, how many of those spots I have to remove. And while it's not really difficult, it is time consuming and they're more predominant at f22. At f8, they're pretty much invisible. You may not even see them. They're a little bit harder to find and a lot of times just completely invisible, so they will not disturb your frame. So step 1, blending complete. We'll worry about the sky in a little while. Right now what I want to do is focus on these really annoying people in the foreground. When it started snowing, these guys disappeared, but as soon as the snow stopped, everybody ran up to go take photos in front of this waterfall. As I said in the video, this is one of the most busy waterfalls in Iceland. It's very close to Reykjavik and you can walk right up to it. It's very beautiful. It's one of the tallest ones. It's just awesome. So during the summertime, this is full of people. They're swimming in the river here in the lake. They're also just having a good time around here. But right now in the wintertime, 6 or 7 people is really not that bad. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to use the rubber stamp tool. Now I haven't used the rubber stamp tool, but it's my favorite tool to use. And just to give you guys an example, I'm going to try something else first. I'm going to create a new layer so all of this is clean right now. I want to keep everything on this layer just in case I want to throw it away later. Let's go to the spot healing brush and use content aware, and let's see what happens if I try to remove these people with the content aware tool. And you can see that the before and after, that doesn't look pretty good. This is actually why I like to call it the content aware fail tool, because it actually doesn't do your edges very well. Like even here it did an okay job, but we can do better manually. And when I mean manually, I mean with the rubber stamp tool. So the rubber stamp tool is really fun to use, and it's those classic Photoshop examples where you want to clone somebody else in. So let's say I wanted to duplicate this person, I could option click them and then just click anywhere and I'd actually be able to clone this person in. That's the classic example of the rubber stamp. But in this case, I want to use parts of the background to get rid of this person. So I'm going to hold Option, and wherever I click when I'm holding Option will be the reference point. So if I click here holding Option and then roll over to this person right here, you can see that it's going to show an outline of the area that I selected. I'm going to turn the opacity down to about, or actually the flow down to about 10 or 20%. I like to work between 10 and 20. I'm going to use the pressure and I'm just going to start painting here. And you can see that I'm going to pull in some of the background here and I'm just going to remove him entirely. So now this person in the red is pretty much gone. Now I'm going to do the same thing over here with this guy right here. I'm just going to grab some of the background here and I'm just going to start painting this out. So it's really easy. Since I'm using parts of the background, I'm not actually painting new details in. I'm just using some of the details that already exist to get rid of these people. Anytime there's edges, this is where it gets really, really fun. We can just grab an edge, like say, let's pick this rock right here. And you can see that it's going to show me where I start painting, that I can actually just change it so I can seamlessly blend that edge in and use that rock again. And I can just get rid of these people here. You see that person was getting a very forward view here, where I was a little bit more pulled back. So this is bound to happen sometimes. Same thing around here. I can grab a corner here and then just blend it into that natural landscape and create something that works, blends really well. And this, again, just takes time. This is a really easy example. There's nothing too difficult about it, but some of this stuff can be really time-consuming. To remove people in some of my more famous and well-known shots, I've spent hours with the clone stamp. And this is one of those things where you can't really get away with automatic settings. The only automatic settings you can use are paying somebody else to do it for you. That would probably be the easiest and fastest way to do it. But if not, you're going to end up doing this manually. But again, you just have to figure out, like along this waterfall, this area looks very similar. So what I can do is just with a low opacity, I can start to clone in some of this waterfall. The other nice thing about it is nobody really knows if it's supposed to be there or not. So if there's all these different, if you look at the waterfall, there's dark shades, medium shades, light shades, all sorts of shading. So no matter what you do here, even if I grabbed some of this here at a very low opacity and started painting it over, nobody would really notice unless it was a completely different tone. So the rule is, if nobody knows, then it's okay, because nobody knows you were doing it, nobody knows it is or isn't supposed to be there, so you can get away with literally murder here. Because if you think about it, we are removing these people from existence. It would also be nice to have a general rule with landscape photography that nobody can wear vibrant colors. That would be nice. So we can't have hot pinks, we can only have muted tones that work with the background. Then everybody would be easier to paint out in general. So I created a spot here. I don't really like that. I'm going to back it up a little bit by Control-Zing a few times. I'm just going to work on the easy ones and then work towards the center. So unfortunately, this is also a reality of a lot of the photography that I do. It's the reason I get up really early, is not just for the lighting, but it's also for the ability to get these places pristine without people. So in the last one, I showed you guys how to do what I called a Patrick removal, but this time we're doing a little bit more than just removing Patrick with a simple layer. So here's the same thing. I'm going to work with the ground, and I'm just going to get rid of these people on the ground, just their footing here, and I'm going to blend that up. And as soon as I get rid of them, Just going to come here from both sides. And this is really an artistic process, and it's one that you get used to over time, and you actually learn different techniques that you really like. My favorite technique is to sort of go at a global way and just kind of get rid of everything first and then be really subtle. Something else that you can do is also pretty cool is instead of using the rubber stamp tool, remember this is all in a separate layer, we can also paint. So notice there's a lot of variation in color and texture here, but it's basically just simple shades. If I just pick the paintbrush tool, and let's make that paintbrush just a little bit smaller because it was a little ridiculous, and I hold the Option key, I can actually sample colors on the palette. So right now, if I selected my background, I could sample any of these colors. And if I go into this palette here, you can see that I can actually sample any of the colors and use that as my foreground. So if I sampled one of these light gray colors, you notice that it actually has a little bit of blue. It's not actually as subtly gray as I thought it was. So I can sample this color, and then at a very low opacity with the flow, maybe even something like 2 or 3%, I can just paint in some of this color. And again, I'll go back to the brush. So again, here with my brush tool selected, I can sample any of these colors. I'm just going to pick something similar to the environment that's around them. I'm going to change the flow from 100 to, this may seem funny, but like 3%, and I'm just going to start painting in on my top layer here where I was doing the clone stamp. I'm just going to start painting these guys out. So I can add some more mist here and sort of start to hide them. Once I add the mist, then I can do a little bit more cloning. So this is actually going to create some more mist, which is fine because any of this color here, people are just going to think is natural from the waterfall, and it's going to help to diffuse and hide those people. So at that point, I can go in and I can start to clone them out just a little bit more. And we'll fill in with the mist. Anytime people are over sky or over backgrounds like this, it's actually really easy to get rid of them. It gets difficult when they're over top of extremely textured environments. So if they're covering buildings or parking signs or anything that requires, I'd say, texture adjustment or recreation. In this case, we're lucky because all of this stuff in the waterfall could or could not exist. It's just mist. It's just color. And anytime here where there's like a cleanup, all I have to do is grab some areas of surrounding pixels and just kind of clone it in, just to match that color and match those tones. So really something like this, it's easy. And again, as a general rule, it doesn't really matter. If people didn't know it was there in the first place, they're not going to miss it if it was gone. But with this kind of stuff, especially landscape photography, we really want to make sure that we can create an environment where people feel like they're all alone. So nothing ruins things more than seeing a photo of something really iconic and then seeing somebody taking a selfie in a Hello Kitty t-shirt. So always get rid of the Hello Kitty t-shirt. So if I go back now to the beginning, we have a before and after. So now that we've done this cloning here, we've gotten rid of all these people, we've fused the blurry waterfall, the streaky water, and the nice reflection. Now it's time to focus on replacing the sky. Let's head back to Lightroom now. So we've worked on these two files here. Now let's focus a little bit on the sky. So I want to get rid of that clear blue sky and I want to replace it with sky that's a little bit more textured. This sky, it's a little bit more flat. I want to pull the exposure down and make some soft adjustments to it just so that I can match some of the way that that looked. Because when the sun came out, you can see that the sky was really blue. This one's a little bit soft and muted. So I'm just going to pull the exposure, bump the contrast a little bit, and adjust the whites and the highlights to compensate. I basically want to just create a little bit more blue in the sky just to make it pop a little bit more. Once I'm happy with that, I'm going to export it, export with previous again so that I can bring it in to the other PSD. At this point, I should point out that not everybody is comfortable with replacing skies. So as anything that we do here, you don't have to do it if you don't want to. If it makes you scream in agony with the thought of replacing a sky and ruining a blue sky in a serene landscape, then by all means, skip this step. But if you're like me and you want to have the most dynamic, colorful, vibrant and textured images in your portfolio, then pay attention because this method that I'm using for a blue sky is a really easy one. Next time we'll have different masking techniques, but right now this is my favorite way to simply drop in a sky and have a seamless mask. So let's take a look at that. Go back into Photoshop first. I need to get this image in. So I'm going to do the same thing that I usually do and I'm going to paste it. But before I do anything with it, I'm going to turn it off. because we have to figure out how to make our selection. Where is the sky going to go? In this case, it's going to go right into this blue section. So I'm going to select the layer that I want to make a selection out of, in this case background, and I'm going to go to Select, Color Range. So on the bottom here, you're going to have Image, where it's going to show the image, but if you show Selection, it's going to show the selection. And under here, Selection Preview, if I have it set to none, it'll show your original image, but if I have it set to grayscale, it'll actually show the mask that I'm creating. And in this case, it looks pretty good. I can actually drag anywhere, and I can try to create a color range-based selection. You guys might already be familiar with this when we were using Nik color effects in the collection. Remember the U-point technology? U-points, the selections work based on the same kind of algorithm. So if I select the blue, it's going to try to isolate the blue. Now here's where it gets really cool. Right now, I can grab little pieces of blue, localized color. But if I change fuzziness, and it's actually been called fuzziness since Photoshop was Photoshop, it's not tolerance like everything else, I can change the fuzziness here, and I can actually select a point, and it'll select more of that blue, which is really nice. Now the more I change this, the more the foreground it'll start to select. So what I want to do is find sort of the most neutral portion of blue possible and then modify the fuzziness a little bit more until I have a nice edge on that background. Something like that. Now that looks pretty good. And when I say OK, it's going to apply it to a selection. And if I create a new mask on any of these layers, it'll apply it to that new mask. What I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder instead, and I'm going to apply the mask to a folder. The reason being is I want to be able to put this layer, the sky layer, inside of this folder. So right now I did select some more of the background. What I'm going to do is just move this up for now, just so it's a little less distracting. I'm going to turn it off again, and I'm going to edit this mask. This mask needs a little bit of work. So I'm going to hold Option, click the mask so I can just see the mask in the mask mode. Now in this case, everything's almost selected, so I'm just going to do some light painting to get rid of some of the black there, and it's really easy. I want to maintain the edge. By doing a select color range and not pushing it too far, I'm able to maintain the harmony of that edge balance. And when I mean harmony, I mean all of that anti-aliasing. So if you think about selections, selections aren't just one-to-one. It's not just an edge. All edges have different types of softness. They have different amounts of softness. And if you start to destroy that softness and wreck that anti-aliasing, that's when you're going to start to have seams. Like, for example, look at the standing area up here. I managed to get a selection in between all of those posts. So it's really nice. And what I'm doing is just pulling some of these highlights away from the edge, very, very carefully pulling these highlights away from the edge, very subtly. And then I'm also going to do the same thing in the sky. But what I'm going to do to make sure that I have all of the sky selected and that it's white, I can go to the info and I can roll over it. If it says, actually it's not going to tell me much, it just says CMYK or K, 0%, means white. But you see how there's little 1%s here and there, 2%, 3%? That means at the top, and if you look up here again, if you guys aren't sure what I'm talking about, that means at the top that I actually have 10% gray. So what I can do is just, again, grab the brush tool, make the brush a little bit bigger, turn it up a little bit, and then just make sure that I paint some white, just so that I have a full selection. From here, I can either paint the rest of it out, which is pretty easy, or I can hit L for the lasso tool, and since I'm using the Wacom stylus, I can just quickly draw a selection here. And I'm just going to draw a selection like this. I'm going to pan down, hold Shift, and I'm going to continue to draw a selection. So now I've selected all these garbage areas, and I'm going to fill this selection with the mask selected with the foreground color, which is black. So that's going to be Option, Delete. So now I have my mask, and I have my layer here with the sky. So this is where it gets kind of fun. Now, here's where skies are a really good time. Like right now, I have some of this mountain, but skies are cool because you can scale them, skew them, do pretty much whatever you want because they're clouds. Basically, anything that I do to these clouds doesn't really break reality because clouds can be any shape or form. I'm also not dealing with a horizon line here, so I have a little bit more justice to be able to move this however I want. I can even skew portions of it to change the way that the sky looks. Once I'm happy with what I like here, I can just go ahead and hit Return, and my sky's in place. So at this point, what I want to do before we move on any further is I want to go ahead and take a look at where we started and what we've turned it into. So I'm going to go ahead and turn everything off except for the bottom layer. This was with our basic raw adjustments. Then we made the soft water and removed the people, and then we were able to put in the sky. So it's really nice. So we've gone basically from this to this. First things first, I still feel like the blue from the sky before was a little bit more intense than this blue sky. So since I have a folder already, if I add any adjustment layers inside of that folder, even something simple like a curves layer, and I modify that curves layer, you can see that I can change the blue, and it's only going to be applied inside of that layer and inside of that folder's mask. So I can just change the contrast of this a little bit and just make it a little bit more saturated and a little bit more vibrant the way that I want it. So what I'm going to do now is this is basically my blend, and just like last time, I'm going to keep all this active so we can pay attention to the start and the finish. So I'm just going to go ahead and name this blend. At this point, I'm also noticing that I'm not sure if this horizon just slopes from the right to the left, or it was a mistake when I was shooting, and I'm not sure because I was doing all this in a hurry as I was teaching the lesson. So there's a good chance that this horizon actually is off a little bit. Well, thankfully it's a waterfall, it looks right, but what I'm going to do is just go ahead and manually tweak it by saying Command T. With the folder selected, it'll select everything, and I'm just going to go ahead and hold the Control key again, and I'm just going to do a little bit of a skew to change this here. And I'm going to make that horizon line just a little bit better. And again, I just have to compensate down here, which is not that big of a deal. And we'll move this down just a hair. There we go. And I'll hit return. See that before and after, before and after. Now it looks straight. Even if it was straight, now it looks a little bit more believable. The last thing you want is somebody to look at your work and say, man, he didn't even bother putting the horizon straight. Even if the horizon was a little bit wrong, we have creative justice to be able to tweak it a little bit in Photoshop. So now that we've done all that, let's go ahead and move on to the next step. Just like we've been doing, the next step is to start adding some more dynamic contrast. Now, since this scene already has a lot of light in it, I'm not going to have to push it as far. The last few scenes that we've had have had a lot of light, so I don't really have to push it too far, but I still want to start with the basics of a pro contrast layer. So I'm going to say Shift, Option, Command, E, and that's probably the hardest hotkey thing you'll ever have to hit with your hand. And now I have a layer to select, and I can say Filter, Color Effects Pro. I'm just going to add a little bit of details to this one. And you can see the classical soft focus was automatically selected there. So if we wanted a super glowy waterfall, this was a dream sequence that would be appropriate. But we'll go to Pro Contrast, Dynamic Contrast, and I'm going to turn that up just a little bit. And really it's going to pull some of the details out here in the foreground. Correct contrast is just going to pull everything into more believable contrast. I tend to over adjust a little bit in RAW so that when I'm in Photoshop I can tweak it to the way that I like it so I don't accidentally lose anything. If I do a correct color cast here, it's probably going to add warmth. And actually it is. It's adding warmth exactly where I want it. But let's take it a step further, add a little bit of warmth the easy way here by just sliding the warmth slider in Brilliance and Warmth. And I'm going to lock it down so that we just have it here in the rocks, around the waterfall, not on the waterfall, I don't want that to be too warm, and also here in the reflections. And I want to be careful that I don't warm up the ice. I kind of like that blue ice. And that looks pretty good, so I'm going to say OK and go with that. I really like that contrast, but I feel we can do a little bit more with Nik Collection to enhance this, and really that's going to be tonal contrast, maybe some contrast color range, just to pull some of these details. You can see here in the foreground the details are really crisp, everything's really easy to see, but here in the background, because of the waterfall, this mist accumulation causes an atmospheric perspective effect, because all of the water accumulation here makes the details a little bit more dull. So a lot of that has to be present in your image, but you also have to remember that you want the viewer to have really rich detail and contrasty images. So my images, I really rely on color and color separation, so there are some things we can do. Before I go back into Color Effects Pro though, I want to do a few simple things, and that's sharpening and then some simple color correction. So the first thing, let's sharpen it. I love the high pass filter. It's really, for me, once I figured out the high pass filter, it saved a lot of money on software, to be honest, and also it's the easiest nonlinear way to sharpen things. And the other nice thing is you can control the areas very quickly that are in focus and extra sharp. So in this case, it should be a no-brainer what I want to have be sharp, and it's these rocks in the foreground. So again, I'm just going to paint this in selectively. You guys should master the high pass filter by the end of this tutorial series. Let's go ahead and paint some more in. I'll use the quick mask key here to make sure that I got everything that I wanted. And I did miss some. I always find that I miss a little bit. So we'll go ahead and sharpen some of this up here, sharpen some of this up here. And that looks pretty good. We can always add a little bit more later if we need to. For now, that's good. The next thing I'm going to do is, this is really bright already. I was careful around the highlights in the top of the mountain, but now I want to boost the highlights in the foreground. So I'm going to go ahead and do a curves layer. I'm going to bump the highlights a little bit here, so that's a little bit more intense. And I'm going to go to the gradient tool, which is G on the keyboard, and I'm just going to have it fade off until it gets to about here. So in the foreground here, I have this nice ramp effect of more brightness in the foreground that leads the eye in and pops the detail of the ice flow, which is exactly what I was going for. I also might want to add a little bit of global contrast to this just by going to brightness and contrast and adding a little bit more contrast overall to pop those values. Somewhere between 15 and 20 is usually pretty good. It's what I settle on. I also want to add just a little bit of vibrance just to bring those colors back, hopefully pop those yellows and those blues just a little bit more. And again, this can be subtle, sometimes somewhere around 5 or 10%, and just in the areas that I want it to exist. So in this case, just the yellows and the blues, and that rainbow pops a little bit more. Later, when I'm finalizing this image, I can go ahead and decide if I want to keep those or adjust them a little bit. But right now, I'll put them all in a folder and I'll just call them adjustments, just to keep it clean so I can look at all my layers together. Perfect. So the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm just going to do some dodging and burning really quick. You guys remember Option, click on the new layer. We'll go ahead and set that to overlay mode, fill with the neutral color. What I really want to do is add some more contrast to these darks here, and that's going to be really easy to do just with a light flow and just some quick painting around here, just so I can create some more contrast in these different tones and really pull it out, so really enhance those shadows. Same thing here, I might want to enhance the shadows around these rocks a little bit just so it looks a little bit more three-dimensional. I don't want to go too much there, just a little bit here, a little bit in this ice flow, just maybe to create a little bit more interest in the image. Again, this is a 100% artistic approach, and it's something where you're just following the natural lighting, Here in the ice flow, I really like this ice flow. I positioned my camera specifically so I could pick it up, so this is a way that I can just quickly dodge out some of those details and bring the attention towards all of it. Same thing with this reflection here. If I zoom in, with the brush tool, I can actually get all of that reflection. So I want that reflection to be a little bit hotter and much more noticeable all around. Same thing here, maybe the rocks reflecting. Maybe I want to bring that out a little bit, make that a little bit more predominant. Basically, it makes the scene feel warmer and brighter because it seems like that's reflecting off the rocky surface. If I switch to black, I can do the same thing here. Maybe a darker reflection comes down. Now this is just pushing and pulling the light that's already naturally there. So it's a really powerful thing that you're able to do just with a simple dodge and burn. I'll just go ahead and finish that up a little bit. Maybe pull some of the waterfall here. If I wanted to get rid of the shadow, for example, in the waterfall, I could actually dodge. I'm not actually going to do this, but I'm going to show you guys. You can actually dodge out some of that shadow, and now that shadow will become less intense because it will brighten the waterfall. So it's not going to get rid of it entirely. You probably could make a selection to do that, but you can see now with the dodge and the burn, it makes it a little less predominant. So we'll just go ahead and leave it there for now, just so we have a softer shadow. Same thing with the rainbow. You can probably brighten up the rainbow a little bit. That's a little bit too much. And maybe just pop the details out a little bit. That's going to be completely up to you guys and how you want to take it. I also want to make sure that I add a little bit more sharpness to the top of this, just so that I can pull some of the details out and make it jump out of the screen just a little bit more. So this is a nice shot. It wasn't what I was hoping for. I would have liked a little bit better quality of light. Well, the sun was so low for most of the time when we were in Iceland, but in this case, I really would have liked more golden light, but we really got lucky to even see the sun. In Iceland, the sun stayed diffused pretty much the whole time, so there were only a few opportunities we had to actually see the sun, and this was one of them. So the last thing that I can do is I can add either more adjustments, I can add more micro contrast here, I can go back into color effects, and I can modify everything, but at this point I may want to just kind of toggle on my before and after to see how far I've taken the original image. So we check out the before and the after. So it's starting to look really nice to me. The only things that pop out really are the dodging and the burning. I like the dodging and the burning, but right now I can go ahead and take the opacity down a little bit. So this is where I'm starting to fine tune, maybe 60 to 70%, so it's a little bit more subdued. The sharpness I definitely like. I want to keep the sharpness, and everything else looks pretty good. Now, this is the stage where you can go in and make it your own style. So at this point, I might go in, add some more tonal contrast in the rocks, maybe pop the waterfall a little bit more, make it seem like it was a little bit more cel-shaded like we've been doing. Also, the sky feels like it needs a little bit more blue to me in the clouds. So in that case, you could use a polarization, or you can just use a color corrector inside of the folder that's already for the mask layer. But otherwise, this one is well on the way to being done. I think the last thing that I'm going to do with you guys before we move on to the next lesson is pull some of the blue out of this ice. So again, it's kind of like the ice cave. We have a blue sky is reflecting blue ice. So I want to leave a little bit of it, but I want to create a custom color correction with hue and saturation. And we can do that just by going to hue and saturation. And in this case, I don't want to desaturate everything. If I just change the saturation globally, you can see it would pull everything down. I don't want to do that. I want to go into the blues, and I'm going to select all of the blues. And now if I change the saturation, you can see that the blues are going to disappear. We're going to create sort of a one-tone or a duotone image. But what I'm going to do is pull this down just enough in the foreground and bring the lightness up just enough in the foreground to where I can paint this into a custom effect. So I'll go ahead and black out the mask, and now you guys will see as I paint this in, it may not have looked very blue before, but as I start to paint, I can separate some of these colors very quickly. So the colors here, I can actually get rid of some of those blue tones. And in my opinion, those blue tones are a little bit too intense. Now obviously you want some of the reflection from the sky, but you also want to be able to chisel out some color separation in here for yourself so that you can really highlight the fact that these are ice flows. You don't want too much reflection, but again, you don't want to get rid of all of the reflection. This is the balance that you have to find in post-processing. It's also one of those things that you can sort of bake down to a workflow procedure, which I am doing here for you guys, but it's going to take you time to see what you like. And honestly, you might get to the point where you really like blue in your reflections and blue in the snow, but for me, I like to remove it. The last thing that I'm going to do is possibly just tone down the saturation a little bit for the red. So instead of using that vibrance layer, let's clear that vibrance layer and let's add a hue and saturation layer to the inside of these adjustments here. Now check this out. If I do the same thing, but instead grab the yellows, now I can actually adjust just the yellows, and if I change the saturation here, you can see my blues are intact, but I've selected the yellows and the greens. So I want to do something a little sneaky here. I want it to be a little darker, so I'm going to pull the lightness down, and I'm going to pull the saturation up. And all that's going to do is shift the tonality a little bit. So instead of being bright and vibrant, it's a little bit darker and a little bit more contrasty. So that's nice, and I can keep this as a global toggle for the entire image because those yellows are only occurring in these rocks. So it's a nice way to get a really cool localized adjustment just in a specific color range without having to use a mask. That looks pretty good. Again, we were able to take this pretty far. We got rid of people, we added a sky, we blended in different water. We were able to do a lot of things that have been kind of leading up to this. So we've learned a little bit, and then in this one, we've been able to start putting everything together. That wraps it up for this location. It's time to move on to the next one.